Explanation of the evidence at the Pentagon on 9/11, created by Wayne Coste, narrated by David Chandler. Okay, here's the table of contents, and here's the table of contents for chapters 9 to 17. Chapter 7, Plane Approach Path. We'll be looking at the radar, the FDR, and evidence for the plane approach. Multiple radar tracking stations corroborate a flight path toward the Pentagon. Then there's a tight right bank and simultaneous descent until Bailey's Crossroad, which is Route 7 and 244, about 5 miles from the Pentagon. The Dulles flight controllers thought it was a military plane due to the 14,000-foot radius turn at 350 miles per hour, things that commercial planes don't do because it's not safe. The flight data recorder, known as the FDR, presents the same path to good precision. Witnesses report the flight path approaching south of the Sheraton Hotel in the vicinity of Columbia Pike. They placed the plane low and in this area. Some of the witnesses who support this observation are Edward Pike and Terry Marin of the CIT interviews, Don Vignolia, Tim Timmerman, and Steve Shorty are in Pentagon City, Deb Anloff in the Sheraton Hotel, and many, many other witnesses support this same observation. Independent evidence of the plane approach path does exist. There is the radar approaching the Arlington area, the FDR, which tracks all the way to the Pentagon, the shadow captured at the Citgo gas station on a security camera frame, the notched tree near Washington Boulevard, damage to 5 lampposts, damage to Lloyd England's taxi. Then, near the terminus impact are the damage to the generator trailer, fence, and retaining wall, and finally the Pentagon facade impact damage. All of this evidence is in alignment and consistent with a large plane impact. There are many points of recorded or physical evidence of the plane approach. Here's a diagram for orientation. There's the tall VDOT communication tower at the bottom left. It's south of the Navy Annex, which is a large multi-story office building. We have a tree by the overpass with a rounded notch taken out of the top of it. It's highlighted with a small circle on this diagram. We have the Citgo gas station where a security camera captures the shadow of the plane as it passes. We have the light poles 1 and 2 on the freeway overpass that will be touched on. There are also 3 other light poles that are of some significance. Then as we get to the terminus of the flight path, we have the diesel generator, the retaining wall, and the facade damage. Okay, radar and FDR data. The radar data for the Pentagon plane is available. Here are the locations shown for different radar sites from which you can see the level of consistency and also compare with the positions given by the FDR data. If you plot the radar data on a Google map, you end up with these blue dots, so you can see the resolution and consistency of the data. The plane comes in from the west, circles to the south, and ends up at the Pentagon, which is the red dot at the top right. Bailey's Crossroads is about where the plane has straightened out. The red dots on this map are the FDR data. It has many more points than the radar data and is remarkably consistent with the path we just saw. We will be using the FDR data points because they agree with the radar data and have more resolution. We also have an interesting independent data point we can use to validate the other data. Thomas Trapasso, who lives at 1400 South Barton, said he was sitting on his deck when the plane flew over him at treetop level, or an estimated 300 feet, right over his porch. We will be taking a look at how well that lines up. The Citizen Investigation Team, or CIT, has an assertion that the flight path was north of the Citgo gas station. They assert that the plane approached the Pentagon area, passed over the southeast part of the Navy Annex, passed over the north side of the Citgo gas station, crossed Washington Boulevard, and either impacted the Pentagon approximately perpendicular to the facade, or flew over the Pentagon while witnesses were distracted by the detonation of explosives, which they explicitly compare to a magic show. However, for all this to happen, there is an implication that there is a high-speed 2,000-foot radius turn. The north of Citgo path requires a 2,000-foot radius turn at over 500 miles per hour. Such a tight turn would require steep banking and generate high G-forces of around 9 Gs, which the aircraft could not withstand. The same G-forces are required if the plane hits the Pentagon or flies over it. Here's what such a turn would look like. The 14,000-foot radius turn at 350 miles an hour would create excess G-forces of only 0.6 Gs. Then, in order for it to follow the radar track, which takes it as far as the Sheraton Hotel, then deviate to go north of Citgo, it would have to make the tight turns shown, assuming a 2,000-foot radius and 540 miles per hour in these last curves, computes to 9.7 Gs. As a narrator's note, Frank Legge and I did an extensive study of the implications of CIT's asserted flight path. You can find a link to that paper on our website, 911speakout.org. This diagram shows the consequences of a 2,500-foot radius curve, leading to the final 2,000-foot radius curve. Not only does this produce 7.8 Gs to the left, followed immediately by 9.7 Gs to the right, it assumes the plane could somehow transition instantly from an extreme bank to the left to an extreme bank to the right, something a large plane can't do. The bottom line is this is an impossible maneuver. Note that the path has been constructed to fly directly over Thomas Barton's house. If the plane came in from some other direction, not supported by the radar tracks, CIT's assertion that the plane passed over the southeast corner of the Navy Annex still requires the final 2,000-foot turn, so the impossible high-speed turn is required for their hypothesis. So let's look at the near-Pentagon approach path. If we take the raw data from the FDR, it produces a path that is too far north. It misses the house at 1400 South Barton. It passes north of the VDOT tower, and it arrives north of the column 14 entrance hole at the Pentagon wall. Note, however, that the direction of motion is correct. It's very plausible to interpret this error as due to instrument drift. If we correct the path to shift the target point to the E-ring entrance hole, the path now passes over the house at 1400 South Barton and south of the VDOT tower. The altitude of the plane was approximately the height of the Sheraton as it passed, as was noted by Deb Anloff, Steve Storti, Don Vignolia, and others. One of the approach path witnesses is Ed Pike. His recollection is about seeing a dark wing go by, not a shadow. However, he could have seen the shadow of the wing or the underside of the actual wing. He was inside his building when he looked out at the plane through the window, so he could not have seen a lot of detail. The diagram shows where the plane and the shadow would have been as it passed his shop. The Citgo security camera captures the shadow of the plane passing by. This diagram shows the location of the plane and the shadow given the angle of the sun. The displacement of the shadow suggests an altitude of about 75 feet here. The tree notch provides a lot of information about where the plane was just before it hit the street lamps. The tree is right in the flight path, close to the light poles 1 and 2 as shown here. Photos of the tree before and after the plane passes verifies the notch was caused by the plane. The presence of the notch seems to define the location of the right engine as it passed. This position is consistent with the streetlight damage. Also, photos show the ends of the twigs were stripped, as if cut by a dull blade. This photo was taken from near the Navy Annex area after impact and shows the tree notch. When you zoom in, you can see the shape of the notch more clearly, and you can see whitish tinged ends of the branches, suggesting fresh cut branches and stripped bark. Here's another photo that shows it even clearer. And if we zoom in, you can clearly see the stripped ends of the branches that were trimmed. Here's a photo taken from the Citgo gas station on 9/11. You can see the smoke at the Pentagon and the tree with the notch in the distance. Zooming in with the same photograph, you can see the notch more clearly. Here's a photo of the same tree from about the same angle from about a year earlier. Zooming in, we can see the top of the tree is bushy with no hint of a notch. Now we're going to take a look at the lamppost impacts. Before looking at the lamppost impacts at the Pentagon, looking at a vehicle impact of a lamppost is instructive. When hit, the lamppost tends to sever at the base. Note that the light poles are designed to break away at the base as a safety feature, since excess resistance would more severely damage the impacting vehicle. You will see the mast is crushed and deformed, with a severed area similar to damage to the severed Pentagon lampposts. The lamps disconnect at the top and fall separately in place. There is minimal damage to the impacting truck wheel area, which suggests that damage to a 757 wing might not be catastrophic. So first notice that the front end of the vehicle is intact. The small item at the top, circled in red, is the lamp, which is detached by inertia as the pole is whipped out from under it and falls separately. We will see that something similar happened to many of the light pole pieces at the Pentagon. We can see it falling and falling. Then if you look at the front of the car, even though it has whacked a couple of these things, it's still okay. We can see that the vehicle was almost kind of drivable afterwards, although it was probably pretty injured. Let's now look at the lamppost impacts at the Pentagon. 5 lampposts were impacted. 1 was bent, indicating impact by a wingtip, and 4 were severed. Lampposts 1 and 2 will be analyzed in Chapter 9 when we look at the Lloyd England accident scene. Lamppost 1 was severed into 3 pieces, potentially suggesting it was impacted by the engine cowling as opposed to just the wing. Lampposts 3, 4, and 5 were severed into 2 pieces. Here's the general layout of the lampposts in relation to the flight path and wingspan of the plane. Here are the locations of the 5 lampposts. Lamppost 2 was the farthest to the outside, and it appears to have been just grazed by the left wingtip. It was bent and knocked directly to the north and out of the way. It landed on the left bank of the roadway. 3, 4, and 5 are severed, as we will see. Here are the parts of lamppost 1. The mast at the bottom right is the long piece, about 20 feet long. Piece 2 is about 5 feet long, seen behind the taxi. There is a small third piece still connected to the lamp support arms, which is better seen in other photos. Lamppost 2 has been knocked down and bent, but not severed. That means it could not have been hit by a direct impact, only a glancing blow at the end of the wing. Here, close to the original location of lamp pole 2, are the lamp and one of the upper arms. The main length of the pole is what we saw on the side berm of the roadway in the previous picture. We will talk later about the lamp support arm and where it likely ended up. Here's lamp pole 3 in a photo of it from the distance. You can see the severed mast. Here is a view of lamp post 3 on the day of 9/11 from one of the first handheld video camera shots. This is a close-up of lamp post 3 during the rescue and cleanup operations. You can see that the top section of the mast was severed and twisted, but is still connected to the lamp support arms. The lamp is detached and is lying in the foreground. The tent in the back is visible in a Jocelyn Augustino photograph from September 16th or 17th. You can see the south parking area in the background. All this helps locate the seam and confirm this is lamppost 3. Lamppost number 4 is also severed. What you see here is the long base, and up against the guardrails is the lamp support assembly. This is another photo from a different angle, close up. The lamp is by the side of the roadway, and the lamp support arm is leaning up against the guardrail. Some people claim the scene was staged the previous night, but these pole pieces would have been clearly visible by the side of the road, and lamp pole 3 would have been easily visible from the road. So these argue against that interpretation. Lamppost 5 is seen here as the first fire truck is arriving. Here's lamppost 5 beside the sidewalk in one of the first handheld videos taken after 9/11. This is another picture of it later on. Let's take a look at the topography along the approach path. This is the approach path drawn on a DeLorme Topo USA map, which indicates the variations in altitude by the contour lines. In the inset, you can also see the contour of the terrain. If you plot the obstacles on a cross-section of the terrain, we have the Sheraton on the left, the VDOT antenna tower, the Navy Annex, the location of the Citgo gas station, lamppost number 1, the generator trailer, and finally the impact point at the Pentagon on the right. Note that the plane is descending as it follows the train, which assists in maintaining its high speed. If we draw this cross-section view to scale, with the vertical and horizontal proportions the same, this is what we would get. Let's look at the G-forces. Pilots for 9/11 Truth have done a calculation of the G-forces to pull out of the dive as the plane approached the Pentagon. Many people have used their assertions that these forces are too high to rule out large plane impact just because the pilots group has said that. So we're going to take a look at what they actually said. Pilots for 9/11 Truth use a simple equation for centripetal force to estimate G-forces. They applied this to an aircraft descending from the VDOT tower with a straight linear descent and transitioning in a short arc, becoming level as it passes lamppost 1 and remaining level until it hits the Pentagon. Their calculation is a pull-up G-force of 10.14 Gs, which would seem to rule out a large plane impact. We'll take a closer look at this. The formula for centripetal acceleration is the acceleration equals v squared over r, a standard result you would see if you took a physics course in high school. The way they set up the problem is shown here. This is from their video. They have the Pentagon on the right, the plane coming in from the left, and a transitional arc whose radius is 2,085 feet. So they show the plane coming in from the left, swinging around level and continuing level as it hits the building. If you follow their calculations, the plane is traveling 781 feet per second. So v squared is 609,961. Dividing by r, which they say is 2,085 feet, gives an acceleration of 292.2 feet per second squared. Comparing this to g, which is 32 feet per second squared, it works out to be 9.14 Gs. Adding 1, which would be present due to gravity, even flying level, you get 10.14 Gs. They do their arithmetic correctly. So here is a more complete diagram of their setup, drawn pretty much to scale, using their values for locating the key points. We have the top of the VDOT tower on the left, the first light pole, the 2,085-foot radius transitional arc, and level flight thereafter. In this calculation, it is a straight line from the VDOT tower to the arc, and a straight line from the bottom of the arc to the Pentagon wall. The key assertion is that the entire transition where the centripetal acceleration is applied is only for the 194 feet of the transitional arc. We have 1 G to the left of the arc, 1 G after the arc, but 10.14 Gs during their transitional arc. Let's see how a plane might make this big transition. Here is the mechanics of a pull-up. The elevators are commanded to point upward. The control system begins to move the elevator. As the elevator begins to move upward, the air pressure from the forward motion pushes the tail down. The angle of attack of the main wing increases. With the increased angle of attack, the wings create more lift from downwash as the plane moves forward. The body rotates relative to the original orientation. The plane obtains some angular momentum that must be counteracted, which is important in a very fast, large change in orientation. To level out, you have to undo all that. The elevators are commanded to point downward. The control systems begin to move the elevator. As the elevator begins to move downward, air pressure from the forward motion pushes the tail up. The angle of the attack of the main wing decreases. With decreased angle of attack, the wings create less lift from downwash as the plane moves forward. To obtain level flight, angular momentum must be counteracted. What we are going to see is how long we would be in that time period. When the screen is white, we are at 1 G. When it turns black, we are at 10.14 Gs. When it's white again, we're back to 1 G. All of the steps just outlined have to happen in that short time interval. Watch. Here we are at 1 G, 1 G, 1 G, 1 G, 10 Gs, 1 G, 1 G, pow. All the maneuvering had to take place within that quarter second. The pilots for 9/11 Truth calculated G-force requires the entire transition to take place in 194 feet, or 1.1 plane lengths, or a quarter of a second. That's why the resulting G-force is so high. This is too fast for any reasonable assumptions about the responsiveness of the control systems in a plane. So it seems like they missed something about how a real plane would actually work. Let's see what happens if we assume a continuous arc over a longer distance. Instead of arbitrarily assuming the plane travels in a straight line from the VDOT tower to the first light pole, why not begin the pull-up more gradually with a transitional arc radius of 16,300 feet, which works for the topography of the ground, the structural limits of the plane, and is consistent with the data in the flight data recorder. We can get adequate curvature to transition to level flight and experience only 1.16 Gs. In other words, the high Gs in the pilots for 9/11 truth calculation do not come from requirements of the situation, but from arbitrary assumptions. If they want to show that it's impossible to make the maneuver, they have not done so. We have just shown an alternative scenario that works for the situation and produces centrifugal effects well within the limits of a 757. Approach path conclusions. A flight path developed from radar and FDR tracks to the Pentagon is consistent with observed data. It is consistent with Trapasso's observation at 1400 South Barton. It accounts for the shadow of the plane seen in the Citgo security camera, and the tree notch confirms the location of the right engine as it passes the tree. Severed lamppost 1, because it was broken into 3 pieces, indicates impact by a significant part of the wing, such as the wing spar, if not the engine itself. The bent lamppost number 2 verifies the location of the tip of the left wing. Near the facade, the impacted diesel generator trailer provides the location of the right engine, and the impacted retaining wall indicates the location of the left engine. In Chapter 8, we will talk about the approaching plane near the Pentagon.